Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty watching the massive alien ships fill the view screen. The Zenthari fleet had arrived at Earth 3 days ago without warning, and now 12 enormous vessels hung in space like dark metal mountains. Each ship was 10 times larger than anything humanity had ever built, and their black hulls seemed to absorb the light from nearby stars. Jake had been fighting in space for 30 years, but he had never seen anything like this. The Zenthari Empire controlled half the galaxy, and their technology was thousands of years ahead of human science. They had ruled over dozens of alien races for so long that most species had forgotten what freedom meant. Now they had come for humanity. The communication system crackled to life, and a harsh alien voice filled the bridge. Supreme Commander Vex Thul of the Zenthari Empire appeared on the main screen. His face was covered in dark scales, and his yellow eyes glowed with ancient hatred. When he spoke, his voice sounded like metal scraping against stone. "Humans of Earth," Vexathul said, "your species has become a threat to galactic peace and order. You expand too quickly and fight too often. Your aggressive nature cannot be allowed to continue spreading through our controlled space." Jake felt his hands tighten into fists, but he forced himself to remain calm. Behind him, the bridge crew waited in silence. Everyone knew this moment would decide the fate of humanity. "We offer you one chance to avoid total destruction," the alien commander continued. "You will surrender all colonies beyond your home system. You will submit to genetic modification to remove your violent tendencies. You will accept permanent status as a servant species under Zenthari rule. You have 72 hours to decide." The transmission ended, and the bridge fell silent. Jake looked around at his crew and saw fear mixed with anger on their faces. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes stepped forward from her position at the tactical station. She had been his second in command for 5 years, and Jake trusted her judgment more than anyone. "Admiral," Lisa said quietly, "they want to turn us into slaves. They want to change what makes us human." Jake nodded slowly. He had read the intelligence reports about other species that had faced similar ultimatums. The Zenthari had a pattern of demanding submission and then slowly destroying the cultures and identities of conquered races. Some species had been reduced to mindless worker drones, while others had simply vanished from history. On the planet, below, Ambassador Ryan Clark was already in emergency session with the Global Assembly. Ryan had spent 10 years working with alien governments, and he knew better than most how dangerous the Zenthari could be. He had tried to warn Earth's leaders that this day might come, but few had listened. In her laboratory on the far side of Earth, Dr. Amy Foster was analyzing data from the Zenthari ships. As humanity's leading expert on alien biology, she had studied dozens of species, but the Zenthari remained largely mysterious. Their empire was so old and so powerful that most information about them was carefully controlled. What she had learned made her deeply worried. Amy discovered that the Zenthari had been manipulating other alien races for centuries. They used a combination of economic pressure and psychological conditioning to control entire civilizations. They had perfected the art of making other species believe that Zenthari rule was natural and necessary. Now, they wanted to do the same thing to humanity. The evidence Amy found showed that several human colonies had already been attacked. The attacks had been disguised as pirate raids or accidents, but the pattern was clear. The Zenthari had been testing human defenses and measuring human responses. They had been planning this ultimatum for years. Captain Pete Johnson commanded the exploration ship USS Pioneer in the outer colonies. His ship had been one of the first to encounter Zenthari forces and barely escaped. 3 civilian transport ships had not been so lucky. Pete had watched helplessly as Zenthari weapons turned the cargo vessels into expanding clouds of debris and frozen bodies. The images from those attacks were now being broadcast across human space. Citizens on every human world could see what Zenthari mercy looked like. The aliens had killed thousands of innocent people, including families with children who had been traveling to new homes on frontier worlds. President Helen Carter received reports from across human territory. Military commanders reported that human fleets were no match for Xanthari technology. Scientists confirmed that human weapons could barely scratch Xanthari armor. Economists calculated that humanity could not survive a prolonged conflict with such a powerful enemy. But Helen also received other reports. She learned that human colonists were already preparing to fight rather than surrender. She discovered that human military officers were developing new tactics specifically designed to fight larger and more advanced forces. She found that human scientists were working around the clock to find weaknesses in Xanthari technology. As the 72-hour deadline approached, Jake Morrison made his decision. He activated the ship-wide communication system and spoke to his crew. "All hands, this is the Admiral. The Xanthari want us to give up everything that makes us human. They want us to become slaves and servants. I say we give them a different answer." The bridge crew erupted in cheers, and Jake could hear similar sounds coming from throughout the ship. Humanity would not surrender without a fight. They would show the galaxy that some things were worth dying for, and freedom was one of them. The Xanthari response came exactly 72 hours after their ultimatum expired. War Master Kethvar led a massive fleet of 200 ships toward New Terra, humanity's most important agricultural colony. The planet fed 12 other human worlds, and its loss would cause widespread famine across human space. Commander Pete Johnson watched the enemy fleet approach on his tactical display. He commanded the USS Defender and 14 other ships that made up New Terra's entire defense force. His vessels were small and lightly armed compared to the massive Xanthari warships, but Pete had spent the last 3 days preparing for this moment. "All ships, this is Defender Command." Pete broadcast to his small fleet. "Remember the plan. We're not trying to win a fair fight because there's nothing fair about this. We hit them fast and we hit them where it hurts, then we get out." The Xanthari fleet moved in perfect formation like a parade of death. Their ships maintained precise distances and followed predetermined flight paths that had been used successfully for thousands of years. War Master Kethvar had conquered dozens of worlds using these same tactics, and he saw no reason to change now. Pete ordered his ships to scatter and attack from multiple directions. Instead of meeting the enemy in traditional battle formation, the human vessels spread out across the system and began hit-and-run attacks on the edges of the Xanthari fleet. They used the asteroid belt around New Terra as cover and launched surprise attacks from behind chunks of floating rock. The USS Courageous, commanded by Captain Maria Santos, dove straight into the center of the enemy formation. Her ship was the fastest in the human fleet, and she used that speed to get close to the Xanthari command vessel. Maria had volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission, but she was determined to make it count. "Target their bridge," Maria ordered her. "Weapons officer, everything we have." The Courageous unleashed every weapon it carried at point-blank range. Xanthari shields flared and sparked under the unexpected assault. The alien crew had never faced an enemy willing to sacrifice their own ship for a single devastating attack. Their defensive systems were not designed to handle such reckless tactics. War Master Kethvar felt his flagship shudder under the human attack. Alarms screamed across the bridge as systems failed, and fires broke out in multiple sections. He ordered his forces to concentrate fire on the small human ship, but Maria Santos had already made her choice. "Tell Earth we did our duty," Maria said to her crew. Then she rammed the Courageous directly into the Xanthari command ship's bridge. The explosion lit up space like a small star. The Xanthari flagship spun out of control with its command center, destroyed, and War Master Kethvar dead. The perfectly organized alien formation began to fall apart as ships waited for orders that would never come. Pete Johnson saw his chance and ordered all remaining human ships to attack, while the enemy was confused. The USS Defender and 12 surviving vessels concentrated their fire on damaged Xanthari ships. They used every trick Pete could think of, including ramming attacks, close-range missile strikes, and coordinated assaults on single targets. The battle lasted 6 hours, and when it ended, Pete had lost 12 of his 15 ships. But the Zenthari had lost 45 vessels, including their command ship, and most of their senior officers. The surviving alien ships retreated to regroup while human survivors evacuated New Terra's civilian population. On Earth, Dr. Amy Foster analyzed wreckage from the destroyed Zenthari ships. What she found changed everything humanity thought they knew about their enemies. The alien vessels were controlled by advanced computer systems that made most decisions for the crew. The Zenthari had become so dependent on artificial intelligence that they could barely function when their technology was damaged or disrupted. Amy also discovered that the aliens had not fought a real war in over 2 centuries. They had grown, soft from conquering primitive species that could not fight back effectively. The Zenthari expected enemies to surrender after a show of overwhelming force, and they were not prepared for opponents who would rather die than submit. General Carlos Martinez began mobilizing human forces across all colonies. He had been planning for this war since the first reports of Zenthari aggression reached Earth. Carlos understood that humanity could not win through superior technology or numbers, but they might succeed through superior tactics and determination. The news of New Terra spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Other alien species watched in amazement as humans had actually hurt the mighty Zenthari Empire. Some began to wonder if the aliens were not as invincible as they had seemed. For so long, Ambassador Reefsaw of the Aquarian Collective started asking uncomfortable questions in the Galactic Council chambers. The Aquarians had been neutral in most conflicts, but they were beginning to see that Zenthari expansion threatened everyone's freedom. If humans could be enslaved today, then Aquarians might be next tomorrow. The silicon-based crystalline hegemony quietly began restricting Zenthari access to their trade routes. They did not openly oppose the empire, but they made it clear that supporting the war would have economic consequences. Other species noticed these small acts of defiance, and some began making their own quiet protests. Supreme Commander Vexthul received reports of the New Terra battle with growing anger. He had expected quick victory, followed by human surrender. Instead, he had lost an entire fleet and made humanity look like heroes to other species. The war he had planned to end in days would clearly take much longer. On a secret military base hidden in the asteroid belt, Admiral Jake Morrison revealed humanity's greatest secret to President Helen Carter. For 20 years, human engineers had been building hidden shipyards and research facilities throughout human space. They had been preparing for exactly this kind of war. "We knew this day would come," Jake told the president. "The Zenthari have been expanding for centuries, and eventually, they would reach us. We've been building ships and developing weapons specifically designed to fight enemies with superior technology." Helen looked at the data Jake showed her and felt hope for the first time since the war began. Humanity had more ships than the Zenthari knew about, and they had been designed using everything humans had learned about alien technology. The real war was just beginning, and humanity was more prepared than their enemies realized. Pete Johnson limped back to Earth aboard his damaged ship, thinking about Maria Santos and all the other brave humans who had died at New Terra. Their sacrifice had shown the galaxy that humans would fight for their freedom no matter what the cost. Now it was time to show the Zenthari that humanity's first blood would not be their last. 6 months after New Terra, the war had spread across dozens of star systems. The Zenthari had conquered 12 human colonies, but each victory cost them more ships and resources than they had expected. Supreme Commander Vexthul found himself fighting an enemy that refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. Captain Ben Parker studied the tactical display showing the Zenthari mining operation at Kepler 442b. The aliens had built 3 massive platforms to extract rare metals needed for their war effort. Ben commanded 5 ships, including the experimental USS Phantom, which carried Dr. Amy Foster's newest invention, phase shift technology. Amy had called it during the briefing. For exactly 3 minutes, our ships can become partially intangible. We can pass through their shields and deliver close-range attacks before they can respond. Ben knew the technology was untested and dangerous. The phase shift generators could overload and destroy his ships without any help from enemy weapons. But the intelligence they had gathered about the mining operation was too important to ignore. The Xanthari were using human prisoners as slave labor, and those people needed to be rescued. "All ships prepare for phase shift," Ben ordered. "Remember, we only get one chance at this, so make it count." The 5 human ships activated their new technology and suddenly became translucent, like ghosts in space. They passed through the Xanthari defensive screens as if the energy barriers did not exist. The alien sensors could not track them, and their weapons could not lock onto targets that were only partly real. Ben led his squadron directly into the heart of the mining complex. At point-blank range, they unleashed everything they had at the 3 platforms. Explosions rippled across the massive structures as human weapons found their marks. The phase shift technology held for exactly 3 minutes, then failed just as Dr. Foster had predicted. "All ships emergency jump now," Ben shouted as Xanthari reinforcements arrived. His squadron escaped with captured intelligence data and 300 rescued human prisoners. The raid had destroyed the mining operation and dealt a serious blow to Xanthari war production. More importantly, it had shown that human technology was advancing faster than the aliens had believed possible. The intelligence Ben captured revealed the true scope of Xanthari plans. They intended to use human genetic material to create a new slave warrior caste. The aliens had discovered that human adaptability and aggression could be weaponized if properly controlled. They wanted to breed armies of modified humans who would fight for the Empire. This discovery horrified human leaders and provided powerful propaganda material. Ambassador Ryan Clark used the evidence to sway neutral species in the Galactic Council. He showed them recordings of human prisoners being subjected to genetic experiments and asked if they wanted their own people to face similar treatment. 4 alien species quietly withdrew their support for the Xanthari war effort. The Ethereal Syndicate announced they would no longer provide advanced technology to the Empire. The Hive Mind Collective stopped sharing intelligence about human activities. Other species began questioning whether Xanthari victory would benefit anyone except the Xanthari themselves. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell commanded the defense of Ross 128, a human research colony that the Xanthari desperately wanted to capture. Her ground forces numbered only 800 troops against 3,000 Xanthari warriors who had never known defeat in personal combat. Sarah used every advantage the planet could provide. Her soldiers wore adaptive camouflage that changed color to match their surroundings. They carried improvised weapons built from mining equipment and construction tools. Most importantly, they used their knowledge of local terrain to turn the planet itself into a weapon. The Xanthari landing force followed standard tactics that had worked on dozens of other worlds. They established a perimeter around their landing site, then advanced in formation toward the human settlement. They expected the defenders to meet them in open battle, where superior alien technology would quickly decide the outcome. Instead, Sarah's troops vanished into the landscape like ghosts. They attacked from hidden positions, then disappeared before the aliens could respond. They used the planet's cave system to move unseen between battle sites. They turned mining charges into improvised explosives that collapsed cliffsides onto advancing enemy troops. The battle for Ross 128 lasted 3 weeks and ended with complete human victory. Sarah's forces had destroyed the entire Xanthari landing force while losing only 60 soldiers. The victory was broadcast across the galaxy, showing that the supposedly invincible aliens could be beaten by human courage and clever tactics. Dr. Amy Foster made her most important discovery while analyzing captured Xanthari equipment. The aliens had a rigid caste system that determined every aspect of their society. Warriors could only fight in prescribed ways. Commanders could only use approved strategies. Workers could only perform assigned tasks. This inflexibility was their greatest weakness. Amy developed psychological warfare techniques specifically designed to exploit Zenthari weaknesses. Human forces began using random tactics that confused alien commanders. They employed improvised weapons that did not exist in Zenthari military databases. They made decisions based on intuition and creativity rather than predetermined protocols. The Free Species Alliance formed when 4 minor alien races openly joined humanity's rebellion against Zenthari rule. The Verdant Commonwealth provided agricultural support to human colonies. The nomad fleets offered their knowledge of hidden jump routes through space. The artisan guilds shared their advanced manufacturing techniques with human engineers. Ambassador Ryan Clark worked tirelessly to build this alliance, while Supreme Commander Vexithol watched his empire begin to crack. Species that had been loyal for centuries started questioning Zenthari authority. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for generations became unreliable as member races pursued their own interests. Captain Lisa Hayes commanded the USS Liberty's sister ship, USS Freedom, in a series of raids against Zenthari supply lines. Her forces used hit-and-run tactics to destroy cargo convoys and disrupt enemy communications. The aliens could not protect every ship and facility in their vast empire against small, fast human raiders. Each successful raid encouraged more species to join the rebellion. The galaxy began to see that the Zenthari Empire was not as powerful as it appeared. The aliens controlled through fear and intimidation, but when that fear began to fade, their control started to crumble. Admiral Jake Morrison realized that humanity was fighting more than just a war for survival. They were fighting for the future of galactic civilization. If the Zenthari won, they would create a galaxy of slaves where no species could ever be truly free. If humanity won, they could build a galaxy where all species had the right to determine their own destiny. The tide of war was turning, but the greatest battles still lay ahead. The Zenthari Empire would not collapse without a final desperate struggle, and humanity would need every ally they could find to survive what was coming. The war entered its second year, with humanity unveiling technologies that shocked both enemies and allies. Dr. Amy Foster worked with engineer Tony Walsh to develop quantum entanglement communication systems that allowed instantaneous coordination across vast distances. Human fleets could now work together perfectly, even when separated by hundreds of light years. Admiral Jake Morrison planned Operation Starfall using this new technology. 17 Zenthari positions would be attacked simultaneously across the galaxy. The aliens would face coordinated assaults that their rigid command structure could not respond to quickly enough. Each human commander would adapt their tactics in real time, while Zenthari forces waited for orders from distant headquarters. Captain Lisa Hayes led the assault on the Zenthari shipyard at Wolf 359. Her task force included ships from 6 different species all working together under human coordination. The aliens had never faced such a diverse alliance, and their tactical computers could not predict how different species would fight together. All ships begin attack pattern Delta, Lisa broadcast to her mixed fleet. Aquarian vessels provide sensor support, while nomad ships hit their flanks. Human ships will punch through their center and target the construction facilities. The attack succeeded because each species contributed their unique strengths, while human commanders coordinated the overall strategy. Aquarian sensors could penetrate Zenthari stealth fields. Nomad ships were faster than anything the aliens had ever faced. Human vessels carried the most destructive weapons, and the crews willing to use them at close range. The Zenthari defending. Wolf 359 tried to respond with their standard defensive protocols, but the diverse alliance fought in ways their computers had never seen. By the time alien commanders realized they needed new tactics, the shipyard was already burning and human forces were escaping to attack other targets. Across the galaxy, 16 other battles played out with similar results. Human coordination allowed the Free Species Alliance to strike everywhere at once, while Xanthari forces could only respond to one crisis at a time. The empire that had ruled through overwhelming force now found itself overwhelmed by enemies they had previously ignored. Supreme Commander Vex Thul grew desperate as reports of defeat poured in from across his territory. He ordered increasingly brutal tactics, including the orbital bombardment of civilian targets. Xanthari warships destroyed entire cities on worlds that had supported the rebellion. Millions of innocent beings died in attacks designed to terrorize other species into submission. The brutal attacks backfired completely. Species that had remained neutral now openly condemned Xanthari actions. The crystalline hegemony formally withdrew from all agreements with the Empire. The ethereal syndicate declared Xanthari commanders war criminals and refused them access to their space. Even some Xanthari began questioning whether their leaders had become monsters. Commander Janet Brooks made a crucial discovery while analyzing wreckage from destroyed Xanthari ships. Their weapon systems could not target vessels, moving in completely random patterns. The alien targeting computers required predictable movement to calculate firing solutions. Human pilots trained for individual initiative excelled at unpredictable maneuvering, while Xanthari pilots struggled without algorithmic support. Janet tested her theory during a raid on the Xanthari base at Proxima Centauri. She ordered her pilots to fly in completely random patterns with no formation or coordination. The human ships moved like schools of fish avoiding predators, while Xanthari gunners fired uselessly at empty space where their computers predicted targets should be. Random flight pattern confirmed effective, Janet reported to Admiral Morrison. Xanthari hit rates dropped to less than 5% when we abandon all formation flying. Their technology cannot handle true chaos. This discovery revolutionized human fighter tactics. Pilots were trained to ignore formation flying and instead rely on instinct and improvisation. Squadrons became swarms of individual fighters, each moving unpredictably while somehow maintaining overall mission coordination. The Xanthari had never seen anything like it, and their defensive systems could not adapt. President Helen Carter authorized Project Phoenix after reviewing Admiral Morrison's proposal. The plan was so dangerous that even experienced military officers objected to it. Volunteers would pilot one-way missions designed to capture Xanthari ships intact. The missions would provide humanity with the technology needed to strike at the alien homeworld, but success would require enormous sacrifices. Captain Pete Johnson volunteered to lead the first Phoenix mission with a crew of 50 brave humans. Their target was a Xanthari dreadnought patrolling near the edge of human space. The massive ship carried technology worth a dozen human colonies, but capturing it would require getting close enough to board the vessel. Pete's team used a captured Xanthari shuttle to approach the dreadnought. They transmitted false identification codes while hiding their true numbers in the cargo hold. The alien crew suspected nothing until human boarding parties emerged from concealment and began fighting their way toward the ship's control center. The battle inside the Xanthari dreadnought lasted 18 hours. Human soldiers fought through corridors designed for aliens twice their size, while Xanthari warriors defended their ship with desperate fury. Pete lost 48 of his 50 volunteers, but the two survivors managed to capture the ship's navigation computer before the aliens could destroy it. The data from the captured dreadnought revealed the location of Zeth-Kalar, the Xanthari homeworld that had been hidden from the galaxy for millennia. More importantly, it showed the defensive systems protecting the planet and the weaknesses that human forces might exploit. Admiral Morrison began planning humanity's most ambitious operation. Dr. Foster analyzed the Xanthari navigation data and made another crucial discovery. The alien empire was more fragile than anyone had realized. Their homeworld controlled everything through a central computer network that managed communication across the galaxy. If that network could be disrupted, the entire empire would collapse into chaos. Tony Walsh worked with Dr. Foster to develop a computer virus specifically designed to target Xanthari systems. They called it Chaos Protocol because it would turn the aliens' own rigid organization against them. The virus would spread through their communication network and expose the lies that held their empire together. The Free Species Alliance now included 12 different races, all working together to defeat Xanthari tyranny. Each species contributed something unique to the war effort, while human leadership provided coordination and strategic direction. The galaxy was witnessing something unprecedented, true cooperation between different forms of life. Commander Sarah, Mitchell trained mixed-species assault teams for the planned attack on the Xanthari homeworld. Human Marines worked alongside Aquarian commandos and nomad raiders, learning to fight as a unified force. Each species brought different skills, but they shared the same goal of ending Xanthari oppression forever. The preparations for the final assault took months of careful planning. Humanity had learned that defeating the Xanthari Empire would require more than military victory. They needed to liberate the alien peoples who had been enslaved for centuries and help them build new societies, based on freedom rather than fear. The assault fleet gathered at coordinates known only to Admiral Jake Morrison and his most trusted commanders. Every remaining major human warship joined forces with vessels from the Free Species Alliance to create the largest military force in galactic history. The target was Xeth-Galar, the Xanthari homeworld that had remained hidden and unattacked for over 3,000 years. Captain Ben Parker commanded the vanguard using captured Xanthari identification codes to penetrate their defensive perimeter. His mixed squadron included human ships crewed by volunteers who knew this might be a one-way mission. They also carried rebel Xanthari who had abandoned their empire after witnessing human courage and determination. "All ships maintain formation and transmit the captured codes," Ben ordered as they approached the outer sensor grid. "Remember, we need to get Dr. Foster's team within range of their central communication hub before they realize we're here. Dr. Amy." Foster traveled aboard Ben's flagship carrying the Chaos Protocol virus that could destroy the Xanthari Empire from within. The virus was designed to expose the truth about Xanthari society to their own people. For centuries, the ruling caste had used mind control technology to maintain power over both conquered species and their own lower castes. The defensive systems around Xeth-Galar were more massive than anything the Alliance had ever faced. Orbital platforms the size of small moons bristled with weapons that could destroy entire fleets. Energy shields protected the planet like layers of armor that had never been penetrated by enemy forces. The Xanthari homeworld was supposedly impregnable. Captain Maria Santos now commanded a captured Xanthari cruiser after her heroic sacrifice at New Terra had somehow failed to kill her. She had been rescued from the wreckage with severe injuries, but refused to retire from active duty. Her mixed crew of humans and former Xanthari slaves was determined to prove that cooperation could defeat oppression. "Target their shield generators," Maria ordered as the battle began. "If we can create gaps in their defenses, the main fleet can punch through and reach the planet." The battle for Xeth-Galar became the largest space engagement in recorded history. Human forces were outnumbered 10-1, but they used every unconventional tactic developed during 2 years of desperate warfare. Ships attacked in random patterns. That confused Xanthari targeting systems. Squadrons worked together without rigid formations. Commanders made split-second decisions based on instinct rather than predetermined protocols. The Xanthari defenders fought with the fury of beings protecting their most sacred place. They had never allowed enemies to reach their homeworld, and they were determined to maintain that record. Their ships moved in perfect formation and their weapons fired with mechanical precision, but their rigid tactics could not adapt to the chaos of human warfare. Commander Janet Brooks led a desperate assault on the planet's orbital defense grid. Her task force included ships from 8 different species all working together under human coordination. They had to destroy the massive platforms before the main fleet could attempt a landing on the planet below. All ships target Platform 7. Janet broadcast. Concentrate fire on their power cores and ignore everything else. We need to punch a hole in their defenses. The platform exploded like a small star when its power core overloaded. The blast damaged 2 nearby platforms and created the gap that Admiral Morrison needed. The main invasion fleet dove through the opening while Xanthari reinforcements tried desperately to close it again. Dr. Foster's virus began its work as soon as her team reached communication range of the planet. The Chaos Protocol spread through the Xanthari network like wildfire, exposing secrets that had been hidden for millennia. The ruling caste had not only oppressed other species, but had been controlling their own people through technology that manipulated thoughts and emotions. Commander Sarah Mitchell led the ground assault on the Xanthari capital city, with a force of humans and aliens who had all suffered under Empire rule. They fought through streets filled with confused civilians who were learning the truth about their society for the first time. Many Xanthari welcomed the invaders as liberators rather than conquerors. The assault team faced Xanthari warrior castes who had never experienced defeat in personal combat. These elite soldiers had been genetically modified for warfare and trained from birth to follow orders without question. But even they began to hesitate as the virus revealed how they had been manipulated and controlled. Supreme Commander Vexthul made his final stand in the Imperial Palace surrounded by his most loyal guards. He activated the planet's self-destruct, systems intending to destroy Zeth-Kalar rather than see it fall to inferior species. But the virus had already penetrated even these secure systems and turned them against him. "You think you have won?" Vexthul snarled at Sarah Mitchell as she entered his throne room. "But destroying us will only create chaos throughout the galaxy. We brought order to countless worlds." "Order built on lies and oppression," Sarah replied. "The galaxy will be better off building its own future." The climax came when Dr. Foster's virus fully penetrated the Xanthari Central Command Network. Instead of simply disrupting their systems, the virus exposed every secret the Empire had hidden. The galaxy learned that the Xanthari had been manipulating trade agreements, starting wars between other species, and using mind control on their own citizens for thousands of years. The revelation shattered the Empire instantly. Xanthari colonies across the galaxy declared independence from the homeworld. Oppressed castes rose up against their rulers. Species that had served the Empire for centuries suddenly remembered what freedom meant. The galaxy's oldest empire collapsed, not from military defeat, but from the exposure of its own corruption. But the virus also revealed something unexpected. Many individual Xanthari had been victims of their own system. Lower castes had been mind-controlled just like conquered species. Young Xanthari, who had never known life without mental conditioning, were as much prisoners as anyone else the Empire had enslaved. Admiral Morrison found himself in the unexpected position of protecting Xanthari civilians from revenge-seeking alliance forces. Some species wanted to exterminate every Xanthari in the galaxy, but human leaders insisted on justice rather than genocide. They had fought to free the galaxy from oppression, not to become oppressors themselves. The battle ended with the capture of the Xanthari homeworld, but the real work was just beginning. The galaxy now faced the massive task of rebuilding civilization without the empire that had controlled it for millennia. Billions of beings across thousands of worlds were suddenly free, but they had no experience with managing their own affairs. Captain Lisa Hayes began organizing humanitarian missions to former Xanthari territories. Her ships carried supplies and medical aid to worlds where local governments had collapsed. More importantly, they carried hope that the galaxy could build something better than what the Empire had provided. The Xanthari Empire collapsed completely within weeks of the virus exposure, but the aftermath brought challenges that no one had anticipated. Across the galaxy, former imperial territories descended into chaos as local governments struggled to function without central control. Some regions declared independence, while others split into warring factions. The galaxy that had been unified under tyranny now faced the difficult task of learning to live in freedom. Admiral Jake Morrison received reports of violence breaking out in dozens of systems as different species settled old grievances. The Aquarian Collective demanded the right to execute Xanthari war criminals. The nomad fleets claimed entire sectors as their exclusive territory. Even some human colonies began arguing over resources that had previously been allocated by imperial decree. President Helen Carter made the decision that would define humanity's role in the post-war galaxy. Instead of claiming victory and withdrawing to rebuild their own damaged worlds, humans would take responsibility for helping establish peace and democratic governments throughout former Xanthari space. It was a choice that many humans questioned, but one that proved humanity's commitment to their stated ideals. Captain Lisa Hayes found herself commanding humanitarian missions to worlds where civil war threatened to destroy entire populations. Her ships carried food and medical supplies to planets where local infrastructure had collapsed. More challenging was the work of protecting Xanthari civilians from revenge attacks by species they had previously oppressed. On the former Imperial world of Kepler 186F, Lisa discovered Xanthari families hiding in underground shelters while former slave species hunted them through the ruins of their cities. Many of these Xanthari were lower caste individuals who had been mind-controlled just like the conquered populations. They were victims of the Empire rather than its architects, but their appearance made them targets for understandable rage. "This isn't justice," Lisa told her crew as they established refugee camps for both Xanthari civilians and members of species they had oppressed. "This is just creating new cycles of hatred that will poison the galaxy for generations." Dr. Amy Foster worked with former Imperial scientists to develop rehabilitation programs for populations that had been subjected to mind control. The process was slow and difficult because the psychological conditioning had been refined over thousands of years. Some individuals recovered quickly, while others remained trapped in mental patterns that no longer served any purpose. The most challenging cases were young Xanthari who had known nothing but the Imperial system. They had been raised to believe that their species was naturally superior and that other races existed only to serve them. Learning to live as equals with beings they had been taught to despise required complete reconstruction of their worldview. Ambassador Ryan Clark faced the enormous task of organizing a new galactic government to replace the fallen empire. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered on the neutral world of New Geneva to negotiate the structure of what would become the Democratic Federation of Worlds. The meetings were chaotic, as beings who had never participated in democratic processes struggled to understand concepts like compromise and majority rule. "We're not trying to create another empire," Ryan explained to frustrated delegates. "We're trying to build something where every species has a voice in decisions that affect them. That means sometimes you won't get everything you want, but it also means no one can force you to accept things you can't live with." The negotiations took 2 years and nearly collapsed several times when ancient rivalries surfaced between species that had been kept separate under Imperial rule. Ryan and his human diplomatic team worked tirelessly to find solutions that balanced competing interests while establishing principles of individual rights and species autonomy. Admiral Morrison oversaw the massive military reconstruction effort. While dealing with his own psychological scars from the war, humanity had lost 60% of its fleet and 30% of its colonies during the conflict. Entire human worlds were uninhabitable ruins, where memorial parks now marked the graves of millions of civilians killed in Xanthari bombardments. The human military faced the challenge of maintaining peace across the galaxy while rebuilding their own forces. Many veteran officers suffered from trauma caused by witnessing the horrors of total war. Captain Pete Johnson, now promoted to admiral, established counseling programs for both human and alien veterans who struggled to adapt to peacetime after years of constant combat. "We fought to preserve our humanity," Pete told a gathering of veteran officers. "Now we have to prove we didn't lose it in the process." The economic reconstruction was as difficult as the political and military challenges. The Xanthari Empire. had controlled galactic trade for millennia, and its collapse left commercial networks in chaos. Worlds that had specialized in single products for the imperial economy now faced starvation when trade routes disappeared overnight. Human engineers and economists worked with representatives from dozens of species to rebuild commercial relationships, based on mutual benefit rather than imperial exploitation. The process was slow because many species had to learn skills they had been forbidden to develop under Zenthari rule. Worlds that had been forced to serve as agricultural colonies for centuries had to build their own manufacturing capabilities. Dr. Foster made her final major contribution to galactic peace when she discovered how to completely reverse the effects of Zenthari mind control technology. The process required months of careful treatment, but it could restore free will to billions of beings who had been mentally enslaved. The discovery offered hope that the galaxy could eventually heal from centuries of psychological manipulation. 5 years after the war's end, a memorial service on Earth honored the millions of humans and aliens who had died defending freedom. Representatives from every member species of the new Democratic Federation attended the ceremony. Dr. Foster, now Director of Interspecies Relations, reflected on how humanity's greatest strength had ultimately saved not just themselves, but brought liberation to countless others across the galaxy. The memorial included gardens where children from dozens of species played together under the careful supervision of teachers from multiple worlds. Among them were human children and young Zenthari refugees whose friendship represented hope for a future where the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. Admiral Morrison, now retired from active duty, watched the children and thought about the long journey from humanity's desperate fight for survival to their current role as moral leaders of galactic civilization. The victory had been achieved, not through conquest, but through an unwillingness to compromise fundamental principles even when facing extinction. The Democratic Federation faced ongoing challenges as member species learned to work together without the fear that had once unified them against Zenthari oppression. There were still conflicts and disagreements, but they were resolved through negotiation and democratic processes rather than violence and domination. As Morrison walked through the memorial gardens, he met a young Zenthari girl whose parents had been killed in the civil wars that followed the Empire's collapse. She had been adopted by a human family and spoke perfect English, along with 3 other languages. When she smiled at him, Morrison saw the future the war had made possible, a galaxy where beings were judged by their actions rather than their species, and where freedom was valued more than order. The price of victory had been enormous, but the alternative would have been the death of everything that made life worth living. Humanity had declared that some things were worth any sacrifice, and their willingness to pay that price had inspired an entire galaxy to demand its freedom.